Last Sunday, we learned about Martin Luther. Luther was a priest in the 1500s who stood up to the Catholic Church over the issue of grace and indulgences, buying your way into heaven. Luther was declared a heretic and sentenced to death. The authorities were out looking for him, and when we ended last week, Luther and his comrades were escaping through the forest at night. Suddenly, they heard the sounds of hooves pounding, and peering through the dark, they saw masked men on horseback. One of the men rushed in and grabbed Luther, put a bag over his head, and dragged him away in the dark. But what did he drag him to? Did they kill him? Torture him? What? What happens to Martin Luther? Now, I imagine you're wondering why I'm not up at the front on the stage, where I usually am. You're probably also wondering why I am sitting with you in the audience, right here. Why isn't the pastor up there? Why is he down here in the audience with us? I guess if I was you, I'd probably be wondering the same thing. So Martin Luther gets a bag thrown over his head, and he's dragged away by these masked horsemen. Luther's head is covered, he can't see. He hears the masked men whispering. He feels his body weight shift as they turn and go up and down hills. Where could they possibly be taking him? Then finally they stopped, and the bag came off his head. Luther's eyes adjusted to the light, and he saw friends. Luther hadn't been kidnapped by his enemies, but by his friends. See, Luther knew people in high places, and those people didn't want anything to happen to Luther. So they staged a fake kidnapping so that everyone would think he was dead and no one would come looking for him. And they hid him here at Wartburg Castle. At Wartburg Castle, in Germany, Luther grew out his hair and beard as a disguise. And all the staff at the castle, they called him Knight George, so visitors wouldn't recognize him or realize it was Luther. Luther spent his time at Wartburg Castle studying in his bedroom. This is Luther's bedroom. It's still there today. And in this little room, Luther began a new project. Luther began translating the Bible into German. Luther was the first person ever to translate into German the Bible. Or, as it is pronounced in German, Die Bible! At the time, the Bible was kept in Latin, which Latin was a language that only the priests knew how to read. Priests are the Catholic version of a pastor, and only priests could read the Latin Bible. So the laity could not read the Bible for themselves. Now, laity means the people in the church who aren't priests. So all of you in the audience here with me are laity. Laity is the congregation. Laity is everyone other than the priest or pastor up at the front. Laity are cops, teachers, doctors, accountants, janitors. Laity are politicians, poets, taxi drivers, computer technicians. Everyone who is not a professional priest or pastor is considered laity. And back then, the laity were not considered spiritual enough to read the Bible for themselves. The laity, they get married and they work to support a family, and these duties distract them from spiritual concerns. Only the priests who couldn't get married and so could spend all their time praying and fasting were considered spiritual enough to read the Bible. This dotted line here between the priests and laity, that I've so artistically drawn, this dotted line represents the spiritual divide between them. The priests are higher up and closer to God, so they can read the Bible, and the laity can't. And since German was the common everyday language of the laity, the Catholic Church wouldn't let anyone translate the Bible into German. In fact, the last person who tried to translate the Bible into the language of the common people was called a heretic, and the Pope later had his skeleton dug up from his grave and burned in public. And Luther knew that. But he did it anyway. Luther's new translation meant that the laity, the average person on the street, the person in the crowd listening, no longer needed to go through a Catholic priest to find out what God's will is. Now they could read the Bible for themselves, in their own language. And we don't appreciate what that's like. We're used to having Bibles in church. We've got Bibles on our iPhones. We're so used to having access to our own Bible in our own language that we don't even appreciate it anymore. We read the Bible if we remember to, but if we forget, we laugh it off and say, "Oh well, I'm such a sinner." But when common people back then first got a copy of Luther's Bible, many of them broke down and wept. For years they could only hear God's words secondhand through a priest, but now they could experience God for themselves. You don't realize how lucky you are to be able to read the Bible for yourself in your own language, and that comes back to Martin Luther. He started something. Now you're probably thinking, that's nice, thanks Luther, but why aren't you on stage again? Why is Pastor Jonathan still sitting with us in the audience? That's a good question. So Martin Luther eventually got tired of hiding in Wartburg Castle. The Protestant Reformation was underway, things were changing, and Luther wanted to help rebuild the new world. So Luther quietly snuck back out into society, and he was contacted by some Catholic nuns. The nuns wanted Luther to help them escape the Catholic Church and become Protestants. So Luther made arrangements with a local fisherman who had a fish cart. The fisherman drove his fish cart up to the monastery and sold the nuns some fish. Then, when no one was looking, some nuns slipped into the back of the cart and hid in the barrels of fish. Which is where we get the phrase, a barrel full of fishing nuns. Anyways, the nuns escaped, and Luther managed to find them all new Protestant places to go. Except for one nun. Her name was Catherine von Bara. Luther tried to find Catherine a place to go, a church or community or a husband for her. But Catherine just didn't want any of the options Luther suggested, because Catherine already knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted Martin Luther. So in 1525, Luther and Catherine got married. But there's just one problem. Martin Luther is a priest, and priests weren't allowed to get married. They make vows to remain single and celibate their whole lives. Even today, in 2015 AD, Catholic priests are not allowed to get married. You see, marriage and sex and family life were considered the life of the laity. The laity get married, work hard from 9 to 5, come home, make love, raise a family, change diapers. The laity are distracted by their secular jobs, distracted by marriage and raising their families, and so they were considered less spiritual because their duties distracted them from God. A priest could not get married like the laity because they thought that would distract him from God. So it was illegal for a priest to marry, and Luther knew that. But he did it anyway. See, the Bible taught Luther that all of life can be spiritual. In the book of Genesis, God created the entire world and called it good. It's not like a church building is more holy than a house, because God created the entire world. All of it is holy. All of it is spiritual. All of it comes from God. God invented sex. God created marriage. There is even an entire book in the Bible called Song of Solomon that is just line after line of love poetry, interweaving spirituality and sexuality. Some people today say God should stay out of the bedroom, as if somehow that was a less spiritual place that he wouldn't care about. But God created all the world and everything in it. There is no place where spirituality is not a factor. Luther realized that living like the laity, getting married, making love, raising a family, didn't make him any less spiritual than a celibate monk. These things are not distractions from God, but one of the many ways in which we can experience God. So Luther got married to Catherine von Bara. They had 6 children, and that ticked the Catholic Church off. Have you ever wondered why, to this day, Catholic priests can't get married, but Protestant pastors can? The reason is Martin Luther. Martin Luther got married, and that set the tone for all Protestant churches. The reason I, as a Protestant pastor today, am allowed to be married to my wife Madison is solely because of Martin Luther and Catherine von Bara. High five, Madison. Luther's marriage changed the game. Now, you might still be confused why I'm sitting in the audience. Yeah, I imagine that question might be frustrating for you. So Martin Luther got married, but he still had time to read the Bible. Shocking. And as he read, Luther noticed that God seems just as interested in the careers of the laity as in the job of the priest. In fact, Jesus himself spent 30 years working as a member of the laity and only 3 years in ministry. Think about that. For the first 30 years of Jesus' life, he was a carpenter. He used his hands to carve wood and work hard and build things. Jesus was a member of the laity, sweating and working hard from 9 to 5. Jesus considered that side of life important enough and spiritual enough to spend 90% of his time on earth doing it. The incarnation dignifies the life of the laity, the work of the laity. Work is spiritual. Colossians 3 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, for you are not working for men, but for the Lord." Sometimes we think the job of a priest or a pastor is more spiritual than the job of a dentist or an accountant or a secretary or a waiter. But Luther disagreed. In fact, Luther was one of the first people in AD history to say that God calls the laity to their jobs in the exact same way that God calls priests to their job. You can experience God in a day of sweat and hard work just as much as you can experience God in worship at church. We think that the hustle and bustle and stress of the office make it an unspiritual place, but it's for those precise reasons that we so need God to enter into our workplace to help us. We need God to give us patience when coworkers are messing up, and to give us humility when we mess up. We need God to ground our identity in His unconditional love, so we don't get our self-worth caught up in whether we succeed or fail at the latest work project. A church is not more inherently spiritual than an office. You are representatives of God in your workplace. Many people will never set foot in a church or meet with their local priest, but they will see you every day at work. sometimes you might forget that. Sometimes you may get frustrated with where you are and wish you could have been promoted already and moved up. But God is calling you to so much more than just having a successful job and good finances. God is calling you to serve and experience Him through your career. Luther was right. The workplace of the laity is just as spiritual and world-altering as the work of a priest, if not more so. But I still haven't explained why I am sitting in the audience with you. See, every Sunday, I, the pastor, am up at the front preaching, and you, the laity, are down in the audience listening. And that might give you the impression that what I do is somehow more spiritual than what you do when you grab a coffee and get on the bus to work at 8 a.m. And that might give you the impression that what I do is somehow more spiritual than what you do when you grab a coffee and get on the bus at 8 a.m. to go to work. But Luther showed that's just not true. Luther removed the spiritual line between priests and laity. Luther translated the Bible so laity could read it like priests. Luther was a priest who got married just like the laity did. Luther made laity jobs just as spiritual as the job of a priest. Luther broke down the lines between priests and laity, showing that we are on the same spiritual level. I might be up front speaking, and you back here in the audience listening, but that dividing line is only physical, not spiritual. And so to remind myself and you of that truth, today I'm crossing over the line and sitting in the audience with you. I am one of you. And you might not realize it, but you are one of me as well. Think about it. What is a priest anyway? In olden times, a priest was someone who was supposed to have this special connection to God. A priest was someone who was supposed to be close to God. But if you recall, back in the book of Acts, we learned that the Spirit of God lives within us all. Jesus left us a mission. His Spirit came to bring it to fruition. Remember that? God is not somewhere off in the clouds. God is not in a temple being waited on by priests. No, the Spirit of God is within you. Which means that God can be just as close to a worker in a field as He is to a priest in a church. God can be just as near to a businesswoman in a skyscraper as to a missionary in Sudan. And so, if a priest is defined as someone who is close to God, then all true Christians are priests, because the Spirit of God lives within us all. And that's exactly what the Bible teaches. When the New Testament refers to priests, it's talking about all Christians in general. 1 Peter 2, talking to an entire congregation of Christians, says, "You are a holy priesthood. You are priests, a holy nation, God's own special people." And remembering and reflecting on this verse is one of the biggest things that comes out of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. The priesthood of all believers. You are a priest. You can read the Bible for yourself in your own language and let God speak to you directly. You don't need to go to a priest to connect to God. You already are a priest. You have a direct relationship to God yourself. The Spirit of God lives within you. Your home, your family, your office, your daily life have the potential to be just as spiritual as any church. You are a priest. The Spirit of God is with you at work, at school, on the bus, in the boardroom, at the mall, at the gym, in line at Starbucks, in a traffic jam, when you're with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You are priests. Everywhere you go is holy ground. Every place you go is a temple of the Lord. The Spirit of God is within you always. I, the pastor, may stand up at the front, and you, the laity, sit back down here in the audience, but that line is only a physical one. Spiritually, we are all sitting in the same place. You are a holy priesthood. You are priests, a holy nation, God's own special people. And that should excite you. It's cool to think about, but it should also challenge you. If the line between us isn't real, and God has called you too a priest, then it sounds like He has some pretty big plans for you. But some of you would rather just stay sitting in the background. You're happy to come to church as a part of the laity, but you don't want the spiritual weight of being a priest out in the world. You think the priests and pastors are the only ones who need to live a super spiritual life, and as long as you come on Sundays and tithe, then you think you've done your job as a member of the laity. But God is calling you to step up and be a priest. A priest at home, a priest at work, a priest out in the world. You are not called to be just another employee making a living. You are called to be a priest making a difference. Monday to Friday, you are surrounded by weary people in an office who need a priest who will listen and care for them. Night after night, you're surrounded by family and friends who need a priest who will love and serve them. Your home is not just a place to store your stuff. Your home is a spiritual place, and as priests, you are called to tend to it. You are priests. Luther gave you the gift of being able to read the Bible for yourself. Millions of Christians throughout AD history would have died for that opportunity. Don't waste it. Don't be lazy. Don't neglect to read your Bible. You are a priest. Live up to your title. Live up to Luther's legacy. You are a holy priesthood. You are priests, a holy nation, God's own special people. We are all priests. Don't ever let me forget that. Don't let me forget that I am not inherently better than you. Don't let me forget that spiritually I sit in the same place as you. And I won't let you forget it either. If I, as a pastor, am no more inherently spiritual than you, then on the flip side, you are called to be just as spiritual as me. And I won't let you forget that. I won't let you forget the high calling God has for you. I won't let you hide behind the title of laity and use it as an excuse not to take your faith seriously. I won't let you compartmentalize your life and be a Christian at church, but someone else at home or work or in the world. You are priests. I won't let you forget that. You are priests. Start acting